The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the honourable members, Mr Buckingham, for moving the motion, and the Leader of the Government, and of course the Honourable Robert Brown. I can indicate that the opposition won't be supporting the disallowance, and I will just take some time to develop that position. Let it be very clear that deregulation of the retail electricity market has actually failed. In 2014, the government, by regulation, deregulated the retail electricity market, and I will come to that because the two are linked, because for the benefit of the honourable member, gas prices feed directly into inflated electricity prices, because gas, as well as being a fuel in its own right, is actually used to generate electricity. And the Minister himself has acknowledged on more than one occasion that gas prices are driving, or one of the cost drivers in increasing electricity prices in this state and elsewhere. So the government deregulated retail electricity prices, and it's true that the regulated tariff was not by itself delivering lower prices anymore, but it did have the benefit of acting as a touch point in the market, a comparator, if you want, that is now missing. And what we do know from the research of carbon market economics and others is that within months of deregulation of retail electricity prices, the retailers had marked up their margins by 10 to 15% on consumers. And we know that those margins have continued to be marked up by percentages well in excess of inflation and well in excess of wage growth, stripping money out of businesses, forcing households to the wall through escalating electricity prices. Now, turning to this regulation and the disallowance, if disallowing this regulation would have the effect not of necessarily bringing down gas prices, but at least of slowing their rate of increase, then we would vote for the disallowance. But it won't have that price because, as the Minister has indicated, the machinery for fixing the regulated tariff has itself been stripped out. And I will acknowledge that my party did vote for it because at that time, which was more than 2 years ago, the effect of deregulation in electricity was not clear, as it is today, and it was to be hoped that competition would lead to lower prices.
That was the promise.
That was the promise, which has signally failed. I acknowledge that interjection. So we are not in a position to support the disallowance because it would muddle the regulatory position, and the very limited work being done by IPART in this area will also be taken away. Now, I think the Minister has overcooked the pudding, as it were, in terms of the terror and the catastrophe that would be caused, allegedly, if this disallowance was carried. That is not the case. But neither is it the case that making this disallowance a reality will slow the rate at which gas prices increase. The government, when the legislation went through, delayed deregulation of retail gas prices to improve competition. And I know what the Minister has said, but the truth is otherwise. The price of gas has been escalating way in excess of inflation repeatedly since the government embarked on the deregulation of energy at a retail level. Well, it may not be entirely the result of deregulation, but it is one of the... Well, I do acknowledge that, but there is no doubt now that it is one of the effects. The opacity in the gas market, the lack of competition are factors in gas prices going up, and, as I indicated at the outset, that is one of the key factors driving electricity prices. Electricity prices which your government, the government now in office, said retail electricity price deregulation and privatisation will bring power costs down. In fact, it's led to the reverse. And then, of course, and I know what the Minister says about the Australian Energy Regulator and how network prices are allegedly 3% lower, but the truth is they'd be much lower today if your government had not gone to court to stop the Energy Regulator cutting those network costs even lower. So, and that would have offset these most recent round of increases. And it's true, wages are growing at less than 2%, but the energy retailers in electricity have marked up the price of their products by up to 20% from 1 July, on top of an 8% increase last year, on top of 10 to 15% increases in the first year of deregulation. So the whole of the energy market needs attention, not just gas on the one hand and electricity on the other hand, which is fundamentally why we won't be supporting this disallowance. But I will say this to the Minister. When the opposition leader in the other place said in his budget reply that the market was broken and that my party, if elected, would commit to re-regulating electricity retail prices, a number of commentators poo-pooed us. You know, on the one hand, some said it was too soon to say competition had failed. Others said the heavy hand of regulation wouldn't lead to better outcomes. And then I was bemused to see the Australian energy market operator yesterday saying the way things were going, governments would have to regulate. And she was very clear that there would be further regulation. And in fact, the whole premise of the Prime Minister calling the retailers to Canberra or to talk to him to have a stern chat as he had with the gas producers, the whole premise of that meeting was that if the companies themselves did not bring prices under control, governments would have to act. Now, of course, it's not much of a threat from this Prime Minister. I mean, he said that to the gas companies, if you don't behave yourself, you know, I'll do something. From 1 July, I'll restrict gas exports. But 1 July, of course, became 1 January next year. Well, we'll see how far and how fast. The issue here is whether any governments are prepared to step up. Now, re-regulating retail electricity prices or gas prices doesn't mean only a fixed tariff through IPAR. There is a whole range of regulatory mechanisms. The big energy companies have said to me that they favour a comparator rate in the market as a touchstone, and a regulated price could be one of the contributors to that. This government itself has regulated the profit margins of private insurers in the motor accident scheme by having a monitor on profit margins. It's not something done by a Labor government, it's something done by those opposite in the most recent motor accident reforms. So there are a whole range of approaches to regulation. What is clear is the lack of regulation and deregulation and letting powerful companies charge whatever the market can bear to pay is not working for households and is not working for businesses here in New South Wales and elsewhere. So on our side of the House, we make no apologies for committing to re-regulation, and in the weeks and months to come we will be outlining the different ways in which we hope to achieve that. But what might have been seen in the budget reply as a bit of a fringe concern is now very mainstream. The Commonwealth Government is prepared to embrace it, and the Australian energy market operator is saying it will come. The Grattan Institute says if things don't turn around, governments will have to re-regulate. It is becoming inevitable if the settings don't change. Now, obviously, governments have to do other things to provide certainty to the market, to provide a clean energy target, a price on carbon. There's a whole range of things that governments can do and should do to provide the certainty for investors so that we have more electricity generation and, of course, more gas production. But the fact is, and there are a number of moving parts that are required to lead prices coming down, but one of them may well be regulation or the threat of regulation. And we make no apologies for embarking on that course of action. So, in not supporting the disallowance here today, we are not embracing market economics alone. We understand competition does have a role to play, but we cannot blindly put our faith in competition alone. And if it was the case that there was a regulated price that people could fall back on, or a mechanism for providing such a regulated price in the market for retail gas, we would be supporting this. Make no mistake about that. But because there isn't, we won't. We won't hold out false hope, and we won't do that. And we do think that gas and energy should form part of the one regulatory network, if you like, if I can use that term, because gas does play a role in the production of electricity.
Do you want a moratorium?
For coal seam gas, yes. But the issue here is that Australia has something like 3 times the amount of gas it needs. In terms of domestic demand for businesses and households, we produce more than 3 times what we need. The issue is, by 2020, 73% of it will be sold offshore. And so the gas producers are losing their social licence because they're putting profit ahead of the public interest. And that's where governments need also to act. So we won't support this motion, but we do support re-regulation of the energy market.